Good morning, everyone. Wow, I'm a seasoned executive now. That's very exciting. Okay, so here's the thing. There's going to be some interactivity. We're not going to deal with the microphones until the end when we take questions. But if I ask a question and you know the answer, just bellow it out. We'll all be a little bit more entertained. Is that fair? So here's our first one. Any of you alive before containerized shipping? Those big boxes, metal boxes that people drive around on trucks? I was, but do you know the impact on the cost of shipping a ton of goods that occurred when containerization was invented? Anybody know the answer? There's a great book. It's called The Box. You should all read it. It used to cost about $6, a little less than $6, to load or unload a ton of shipping onto a ship to cross the Pacific or the Atlantic. $6. Anybody want to guess what it costs now with containerized shipping? It used to cost $6. Now it costs about 16 cents. So imagine you're in the business of doing something that relies on the fact that it's expensive to ship stuff. And all of a sudden the cost of shipping goes from $6 to 16 cents. Is that going to disturb your reality a little bit? Yeah. And this kind of stuff happens all the time, and this is what I want to spend a few minutes talking about, because we all live in this very complicated reality. We all live in a world of change. Change is the one thing that we can always consider to be a constant, right? And how we deal with that change is both fundamental to our success as leaders and fundamental to the success of the organizations that we're part of. But whenever I get up in front of a group of people, the first thing I always say, and I will always tell you, is if somebody thinks they're going to teach you something or explain something to you or be useful to you in some way, the first thing you should say is, who are you and why should I listen to you? So briefly, I'm one of those Silicon Valley people. Anybody know what we call this outfit in Silicon Valley? This is sort of the Silicon Valley uniform. We call it a style mullet, right? You've got the Savile Row jacket on the top and jeans and sneakers on the bottom, sort of like at the haircut. I literally ran the team that shipped the first set-top box that allowed you to pause live television and record it on a hard drive. That was a sort of a minor change. I vividly remember, so of course I was at Replay TV when we built these things, so we had one at home. So my daughter, who's now 26, grows up with a Replay TV in the house. And we're on a vacation once, and we're at a hotel, and she says that she wants to watch her favorite TV show. I don't even remember what it was. And I said, I remember her reaction. I said, it's not on right now. You remember that? Television? It's not on right now. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, this is a hotel. They don't have like fancy technology, and your show isn't on right now. She literally didn't know what that meant. That's the kind of change that makes us all insane, but it's not the only kind of change that happens. I give you one more. I'm really old. Any of you used to do your taxes with a pencil and paper? Remember going to the post office or the library to pick up paper forms, and then like you'd have a calculator and a pencil? Anybody? 2 people? And then TurboTax came out, and you're like, oh my God. This is so much better. I remember I worked at Intuit for a number of years. Our mantra used to be, we want to build products that are so good that you could never imagine going back to the way things were before. And that was that change also. Going from paper to TurboTax was unbelievable. So I was at Intuit for 8 years. I ran about a third of the company. That was the first job in which I had about 2,000 people working for me. And it was there that I was trained by a bunch of ex-General Electric people. So I'm this very weird amalgam of sort of Silicon Valley, hair on fire, blue mohawk, super innovative, let's start a company tomorrow together kind of guy. And Six Sigma green belt, trained by a bunch of General Electric people. Leadership is just leadership. I don't care if you're selling refrigerators or aircraft engines or money, it's all the same thing. And a lot of people believe those two things are at odds with each other, that we cannot be innovative and creative and fast-moving and exciting and riding around on Razor scooters and wearing the style mullet, and at the same time, be disciplined, be efficient, really drive change management in a structured way. I argue you can absolutely do both, and that you want to try to do both. When I showed up at Intuit, I shipped more new products in the first year that I was there than the entire rest of the company combined, because I came from a world where shipping new products was what you had to do to survive. My boss took me aside. He said, "Dan, you're brilliant." He was the CEO at the time, one of these ex-General Electric guys. Steve Bennett, he was one of the top 4 guys at GE Capital. He said, "Dan, you're amazing. You've shipped more new products than the whole rest of the company combined, and your interpersonal style is so bad, if you don't fix it, I'm going to fire you." That was sort of an eye-opener. So I left Intuit because it's an amazing company, but it's run by a bunch of Harvard MBAs who were all brand managers at Procter & Gamble, and that's not really me. And I went to a little company called Box. Any of you Box users? Some of you will be, whether you'll admit it or not is the question. So there's Dropbox and Google Drive and OneDrive, which are sort of consumer-oriented sharing products and content products. Box is an enterprise-oriented content product. It's used by IBM and General Electric and lots of small companies also. But I was there from about 5 million in revenue to about 500 million in revenue over the course of 8 years. And in that time, I experienced an unbelievable amount of change. And now I try to teach people how to not make the mistakes that I made. And I've made all the mistakes. Like most of the mistakes I've made 5 times. So we live in this world of change, right? We used to run around job sites with clipboards. Now we run around job sites with iPads. We used to send people invoices on paper using a piece of paper and a pencil. Now we wouldn't imagine doing it that way. We do it all electronically, right? You like these? So I used to be a big stock photography person. Any of you like have a favorite website for stock photography? Like you're putting together a presentation, you need a guy with a hard hat. You're like, guy with hard hat. Yeah, the problem with that, of course, is that you get guy with hard hat with purple background on the left side and guy with hard hat with green background on the right side, and you're like, do I remember how to use Photoshop? So I'm done with that. And here's another one of these huge changes, right? I created those 2 images on Midjourney. I just said, imagine in the style of stock photography, a guy in a hard hat and a safety vest working with a clipboard. And that's what I got. So these are AI-generated images. So the question came up yesterday, are any of us using AI in our day-to-day lives? Well, here's an example. And it's changed my life forever. Like, I don't do stock photography anymore. Midjourney is very cool if you've never used it. And if you try to use Midjourney, you'll have to learn how to use Discord, and that will also connect you with your 17-year-old. So it's all good. Not only do we live in this world where there's all kinds of change, but the pace of change is accelerating very rapidly, and we all know that, right? It took Facebook a year to get to 1 million users. Anybody know how long it took ChatGPT to get to 1 million users? 5 days. 5 days from 0 to 1 million. And the companies that adapt to these kinds of changes win, and the companies that don't adapt lose. How many of you are old enough to have had a Nokia or a Motorola cell phone? Yeah, me too. How many of you presently own a Motorola or Nokia cell phone that still works? Yeah, 0. Remember these guys? What a story. 2007, Research in Motion is Canada's most valuable company. Market cap of $67 billion. Global market share of 20%. They basically had 100% share of all the business users and 0% share of all the consumers. But global share in the smartphone market of 20%. I love this shit. 2008, they introduce a device that's going to get rid of the iPhone, right? This is what Henry Blodgett had to say. RIM's iPhone killer is just like the iPhone, but crappier. At the very core of RIM, at its DNA, is the innovation. We always think ahead. We always think forward. We sometimes think the unthinkable. Apparently, they thought the unthinkable, which was that the iPhone was stupid, because this was never true. RIM was never a company that had innovation at the heart of its culture. It was never really a company that was looking forward. But this was their headset. This was what they said about themselves. This was their internal talk track. By the third quarter of 2016, the BlackBerry global market share is 0. 20% in 2009, including essentially all enterprise users, and 0 7 years later. Their market cap was 95% lower than it was in 2007. Can we please not do this? Like, none of us want to be part of this, right? And the way you get to be part of this is by thinking that you're going to resist change, by ignoring change instead of embracing it. Change is always painful. Change is always scary, terrifying even. But this is what happens if you don't pay attention to change and if you don't deal with it in some effective way. Here's the opposite story. I literally remember sitting down with somebody in 2006. I was still at Intuit. Apple was paying us to put QuickBooks on Mac OS because their share was so low that we wouldn't have bothered to do the engineering otherwise. Apple is paying Intuit to put QuickBooks on Mac OS because their share is so low, why would you bother? And I was running the QuickBooks team a couple years before this, and I had basically decided, screw them. I don't care if they're paying us. We're not doing this anymore. Like, they're going down the toilet. It's a losing proposition. The Macintosh is a failing computer franchise in 2006. Apple's market cap is $73 billion. The next year, they introduced the iPhone, and it's all over, right? 4 years later, 3 years later, their market cap is 4x. We have now passed RIM, and I don't see them catching up with us in the foreseeable future. They must move beyond their area of strength and comfort into the unfamiliar territory of trying to become a software platform company. It really doesn't matter what the last 3 words are. The important words are beyond their area of comfort. I once heard a talk by the guy who was the commandant of the US SEALs, the US Navy SEALs, and he said that in his experience, when he was forced to make an important command decision, the decision that made him the most personally uncomfortable was inevitably the correct one. I think that's a really important thing for all of us to remember, and we'll talk more about it in a couple minutes, but staying in your comfort zone can be a very, very dangerous thing to do. In Q4 of 2023, after 15 years of incredibly rapid innovation, now we can talk about whether that innovation has always been as rapid as it could have been, but iPhone's US unit share is 60%. They are the high-priced player in the market. Their dollar share is well over 60%, but their unit share is 60%. They weren't even in the phone business when we were all running around with Nokia handsets. But they saw an opportunity, and they embraced it, and they took advantage of it. So if we're going to change, what's so hard about that? Well, the problem is most of us screw it up all the time. Change is about leadership, and leadership is hard. Leadership is scary. And so we mess it up. Half of all corporate change initiatives fail, according to Gartner, not according to me. Why? Well, to start off with, most people don't have a plan that makes any sense, if they have a plan at all. Or they have a plan, and it's written down, and they're going to stick to it. This is one of these problems with these GE guys. Like, they wake up every morning, and they're like, we're doing it the GE way. I'm like, wait, the iPad was just introduced. And they're like, yeah, but the GE way says we're supposed to do this. I'm like, yeah, but containerized shipping was just introduced. I mean, you've got to be nimble. You got to have a plan, but you got to have a plan that's so rigid that you're unwilling to change it. You got to talk. You got to talk a lot, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about this. But communication is really at the core of change management, right? Change management is just some big word that people made up to talk about trying to make something happen that's important. But if you don't communicate effectively, your change management initiative is doomed. There are going to be people who are all in favor of whatever it is you're trying to change. There are going to be people who are jumping up and down with joy. And there are going to be people who think this is the stupidest thing they've ever heard of. And if you don't figure out who those people are and figure out why they are objecting to what you're trying to do and how you're going to overcome those objections, you're in a lot of trouble. We're going to talk about some tactics for doing that a little bit later on. You can have the best plan in the world. You can have the best execution in the world. If it's at odds with your company's culture, it's never going to work. Any Boeing employees in the audience? I mean, this is some scary stuff. I have a cousin who's an engineer at Boeing. He's been there for a long time. Boeing is a great company, but they completely lost the plot around their culture for safety, at least in the commercial aviation division. Your culture, which is just a fancy word for the agreement that we all have about how we're going to interact with each other, how we're going to work with each other, right? Your culture is fundamental to everything that you do in your business life. And if you try to drive change that's at odds with your culture, that is never going to work. So you've got to get after the culture first before you try to drive the change. You can't do things that are completely unrealistic. You've got to, as one of my ex-bosses was fond of saying, Lori Norrington, she went on to be the CEO of Shopping.com and then the president of eBay. She basically ran half of eBay for Meg. Incredibly talented woman. She was the most senior female operating executive at General Electric before she became my boss. She always used to say, Dan, you got to eat the pig one bite at a time. I'm like, yeah, don't set unrealistic expectations. Do these things in a stepwise manner. And you've got to, while you're doing it in a stepwise manner, you've got to create and celebrate the wins along the way. You can't wait till the end to throw the party, right? It's a momentum game. You know, this is another way we can connect with our kids, right? It's all about the mo. Okay, so why is change hard? Change is hard because when your throat's parched, it's hard to keep speaking. Have anybody tried to drive a major change initiative and failed and be willing to admit it in public? I have. Yeah, I once blew a $30 million hole in the ground at a public company. I went in to tell my boss, Steve, I'm going to miss my nut by $30 million. It's like, Dan, what? Yeah, that did not go well for me. Change is hard because we'll come back to it tomorrow, later, but the professor yesterday, what did she say? Anybody remember? Things are hard because it's all about the people. In order to improve performance, in order to drive change, you have to change the way that people think or act, and people are annoying as shit. They've got emotions. They've got their own agenda. They seem to care about their career. It's very annoying. You've got to remember that human beings are involved and human beings go through a journey when you try to change their stuff. Anybody ever read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? You should all go read it. It's about 20 pages. It's the best book on change management I've ever read. When you break and try to reform the relationships in a business context, and that's essentially what change is all about, some of your human beings are going to deal with that brilliantly, and some of your human beings are not. They are going to get all wrapped around the axle, around their self-esteem, around their title, around their compensation, around their comfort level, around the fact that they just don't want their shit changed around. Excuse my horrible Silicon Valley language. Dealing with the human factor is the hard part. The rest of it is relatively easy. We can implement software, we can buy a new building, we can buy a new piece of equipment or machinery, we can choose a new shipping vendor, we can move into a new geography and adapt to a new currency. We can do all of those things. The mechanics are not the hard part. It's the people that are the hard part. That is why change is difficult. And that's the headset that we all need to have as leaders. Change is hard because of the human beings. And so we have to try to empathize with those people. We have to try to put ourselves in their shoes. We have to try to understand how they're feeling about this change that we want to have happen. I was having a great conversation last night with an attendee who runs a business here in North America. And he just took over a new role. And people are basically stealing from him, he finds out. They're gaming the expense management system to like go on trips to the Caribbean and buy themselves nice dinners and charge it all to the company. And they think it's fine, right? That's the culture that they're used to. Those are the rules they think that they're supposed to abide by. That's how they've been playing the game, except he doesn't want them to do that anymore because he actually thinks that treating the company like you're an owner and treating the company's money like it's your money is sort of important. So he starts firing people. They don't like it all that much. I don't know why. Like, one day I was going to Jamaica on the company's dime and staying in a villa on the beach, and the next day I'm not. That doesn't feel good to me, right? Now that may seem like a silly thing. Like, of course, gaming the expense account system is not an okay thing to do, but if your culture says it's an okay thing to do, if you've been doing it for 10 years, and some person comes along, some new boss comes along and says you got to change, you're not going to like it very much. People go through a very predictable emotional cycle when their relationships, and I don't just mean interpersonal relationships, I mean their relationships with their reality change. It's sort of the same cycle that we all go through when something really bad happens to us. You'll notice some similarities, right? First is the shock. What do you mean we're reorging? What do you mean we're implementing a new rebate management system? Then there's the denial. Oh, this will all just blow over. You'll never get this to happen. I won't really lose my job. I won't really have to learn how to use some new piece of technology. Then people get mad. This is the really fun part. Have any of you ever been through this? I've been through this. Like, people get mad. They'll like come into your office crying and yelling at you and asking questions. Do any of you have all hands meetings? That's a Silicon Valley thing. We get everybody together every Friday or every other Friday. They'll start asking annoying questions in very loud voices at the all hands meetings. Are we really going to do this? This is bad for the business. You can tell that, can't you? Then they get depressed. Because once they sort of figure out that it's not good for them, but they also figure out it's going to happen anyway, then they get depressed. And then, what do people do when they're depressed and there's somebody else involved? You guys must have dealt with this with your spouse. Something's not going great. They finally get to the point where they're like, okay, it's going to happen anyway. Then what happens? I need more money. I want a promotion. Give me a new job in this division over here. They start bargaining. And finally, we get to acceptance. It's a very predictable cycle. The fiddly bit is figuring out where on the cycle each person is. Because we don't all go through the same cycle at the same speed, and certainly not in response to the same change. Some of us are going to be down with it. Some of us think we're going to get fired, and we're really not down with it. So how can you deal with all of this? Well, when I was asked to give this talk, and I said, who's going to be in the audience? And they said, well, everybody's going to be in the audience. We've got CEOs, we've got individual contributors, we've got like mid-level finance managers, we got everybody. I said, well, that's sort of hard for me to come up with a talk for everybody. So I'm actually going to talk about this from 3 different points of view. And I want to encourage you to listen to the parts that are from the point of view that isn't you. Because in some sense, those are the most valuable things for us all to hear, right? You can help to drive change. You as a leader, whether you're an individual contributor, a mid-level manager, or the CEO, you can help to drive change. But how you do it depends on your position relative to the organization that's changing. You've got to communicate clearly. Yeah.
Those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others.
It doesn't seem all that hard to clearly communicate the why. And if you're not a person who's a student of history, if you're not living on YouTube, I encourage you occasionally to watch some of the great orators of our past. Does anybody remember the punchline of that John F. Kennedy speech? Before this decade is out, to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. It was going to cost, I think, $5 million a year, which at the time was a huge amount of money. It was not something that anybody in the United States thought was doable or that we should do. When you go watch that speech, which is all over the internet, if you go watch the I Have a Dream speech, if you watch the great leaders of the 20th century explain why the change needs to happen, you can really get a sense of the impact that that kind of communication strategy can have. And it's really the foundation. If I don't know why we're doing this, I really don't care about it. And I'm never going to get behind it. So communicate the why, come up with a clear strategy, get a team of people together to go after the problem, provide that team opportunities to establish and communicate those small wins, give your team air cover, and then lead by example. If you're a CEO, if you're a senior leader, these are the key steps. This is how you drive change tops down. Clearly establish the need, describe a strategy and a vision for the change, pick a tiger team of people to delegate the task to that are trusted, make sure there are some good, culturally impactful people on that team. Give them regular opportunities to engage with the rest of the organization while you provide them air cover and support. And then you got to walk the talk. Leaders who say one thing and do something else are ridiculed by their people. So if you're a CEO, if you're a general manager, if you're a business unit leader and you're driving change tops down, these are sort of the key steps that you've got to take. But what if you're not the CEO? What if you're an individual contributor and your boss is the one who says we've got to do this change, or your boss's boss, or your boss's boss's boss? How can you participate? How can you help? The first thing is use your inquiry-based leadership skills to draw out from your boss the things that you need from them. Ask them the questions that help elucidate the answer. Why are we doing this? What do you hope to get out of it? What is your strategy? And if that leader doesn't understand that they need to articulate the why, doesn't understand that they need to clearly write down and communicate a strategy, then you've got to work behind the scenes to help them. Not in public, not where they can be embarrassed, but in their office, at the water cooler, behind the scenes, you give them that coaching. And I hope that you've got a leader that will take that kind of coaching. Then you be part of the buzz that's in favor, right? In that chat at the water cooler, at lunch, at the all hands meeting, when everybody's sitting around waiting for the meeting to start, you're the one who's talking about how cool this is going to be, how great the future looks, how excited you are about the future state. And then you engage with that Tiger team, with that change management team. Maybe you even join that team, but at a minimum, you're there for them, you're helping them, you're supporting them. You're there for whatever they need. I'm skipping all the good stories because I'm going to run out of time. Too many slides. What about if you're in the middle? You've got some power, you've got some authority. You're not an individual contributor, but you're also not the CEO. You know change needs to happen. You don't have the authority to make it happen by yourself. I'm guessing this is the reality for most people in this room. I know there are a lot of people in the other two buckets, but I would guess the majority of you are in this situation. Maybe you run the pricing or rebate function. Maybe you're the FP&A leader in your organization. Maybe you're the revenue operations leader in your organization. You're senior enough to have an impact. You're senior enough that people will listen to you. But you don't have signature authority. You don't have decision-making authority. You can't just do it. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to write down why this change has to happen. And then you've got to take that writing to somebody who does have the power to make the authority to make the decision, and get them to sponsor your initiative. You've got to have an executive sponsor at the right level of seniority, or you're never going to succeed. And your commitment to them is, look, I'll do all the work. I'll be the person behind the scenes who's drafting all the documents. I'll prep you for every meeting, for every Q&A. But you need to have my back. You need to use your political muscle to validate this change initiative. You need to be the one who is communicating, because people won't listen to me. They will listen to you. Then you're going to become the leader of the change management team. Whatever you call that in your organization, the chairperson, the team lead, whatever. You're going to be the one who picks the team, who sets the meetings, who sets the agenda, who drives the process. And you're going to work with that team to develop a clear vision and strategy and get shared vision with your leader and your executive sponsor on that shared vision and strategy. And then you're going to talk. You're going to talk over and over again. You're going to talk to everybody you can find. You're going to talk in every venue you can imagine. You're going to simplify that message, and you're going to repeat it over and over and over and over again. This is why we have to do this. This is how we're going to do this. And then you're going to spoon feed your leader, your executive sponsor, the behaviors that you need them to do, that you need them to undertake. I'm here to tell you that if you're a senior executive and the right person comes to you with this kind of an approach, it is like breathing fresh air for the first time. because your boss wants this to happen, but they don't know how to make it happen themselves. If you can help them to make it happen, you're a hero. Let's talk for just a second about some tactics. Maybe I'll pause here. Anybody have any questions about all that part before I dive into a little bit of tactics? Have I terrified you all into silence? Not a single question? It all makes perfect sense. All right, it's not on me when you try this and it doesn't work out right. So if it's the people, then how do we deal with them, right? The first thing you got to do is you've got to figure out who your stakeholders are. And some of them are going to be obvious, right? If you're the FP&A leader and you're trying to drive some kind of fundamental change in your rebate strategy, there's somebody on your commercial team who cares. There's probably 30 people on your commercial team that care, but there's definitely one. If you're trying to drive an initiative to deploy new software and you're in your revenue operations team or your rebate management team, somebody in IT has to help you or you're not going to get this done. They're going to have to deploy resources in order to get this software implemented. So they care. You got to figure out who all the stakeholders are across the entire organization. The people who are close to you, the people who are farther away. You got to make a list. And you got to figure out, two monitors. You got to figure out where you think they stand relative to this initiative that you're trying to put together. Who loves the idea? Who hates the idea? Who's sort of neutral, like they'll take it or leave it, they don't care that much. This is a very Six Sigma kind of methodology. I really like doing this kind of thing, right? This is a 3x3, the famous 9-blocker, but applied in a different way. Applied to the question of who's in favor, who's against, how do your stakeholders line up relative to the change management program you're trying to implement? For each group in that step, you've got to figure out where they stand. Then if they're resistant, you've got to figure out why. Maybe the IT guy is resistant because his boss's boss has got all his resources focused on something else. It's not that he thinks this is a bad idea, he just doesn't have the resources to work on it right now. Maybe there's somebody who thinks their job is that Excel spreadsheet that you're using to track all your rebate programs right now, and if you implement Enable, their job's going to go away, and strangely enough, they don't like that very much. Maybe it's political. Maybe somebody thinks they're going to lose power, they're going to lose influence, they're going to lose authority because of this change you want to implement. You've got to figure out why they are resistant. And you've got to figure out how resistant they are. And I know you're saying to yourself, yeah, but I know all that stuff. But if you don't write it down, then you can't have a plan for how to deal with it. And that's the next thing you got to do. You've got to have a plan for dealing with all the people who are highly resistant. They're not going to magically wake up one day and decide they love your new strategy. They're not going to wake up one day and go from being really annoyed and pissed off because they think they're going to lose their job to being happy. Maybe you've got to figure out what their next role is going to be and go find the hiring manager for that new role and convince them that this person would be a great fit for that open opportunity doing this related but slightly different thing. Once you've got a plan for how to deal with the resistance, then you can go execute your plan. And in the end, I think this is really the fundamental thing. If you clearly communicate why the change needs to happen, if you write down a strategy for making the change happen, if you identify the people who are resistant and figure out how you're going to overcome those objections, then you can drive your change program successfully and you'll come out a hero. And you won't be in the 50% that fall on their face. I hope this hasn't been too boring. I've been delighted to share a few thoughts with you. Anybody have any questions? David, are Enable people allowed to ask questions? after the honeymoon period has worn off, how do you sustain and track a change management process? I think you used the key word at the end there. It's process. And we all hate the P word. Well, many of us hate the P word. Some of us were trained by a bunch of General Electric people and we think it's cool. But, you know, process is a bad word. But if you think about something as being ongoing, you treat it like it's ongoing. You tool up around the fact that it's going to be ongoing. Then you can keep that momentum going. A lot of it is about communication. It's those small wins. It's publicizing the small wins and celebrating the small wins. One of the great ways to overcome resistance is to get one of your resistant people and figure out a way to celebrate them as part of your change management process, right? So I think that's the key. It's keeping the momentum, and a lot of it is about public communication. Other questions or thoughts? Way back. Come up to the microphone here if you don't mind so that we can all hear you. Otherwise, I have to repeat the question, and you're all tired of hearing me talk.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. Question, you said you skipped some of the stories. Do you have any personal anecdotes of where you saw this work really well and examples of your experience throughout your career where you've seen it not maybe from top down, but middle driving change or something along those lines that you could share with the group?
I was with you until you said not tops down. I mean, when I launched a whole bunch of new products at Intuit, I was a general manager of a business unit. And the key there really was we had one product. It was sort of the goose that laid the golden egg, but we had no future plan. And so the real key there was for me to articulate, look, if we're going to keep growing, we've got to have new products in the portfolio. Probably the best initiative, the best example that I can offer you briefly before I'm going to get kicked off the stage was at Box. I think this is public knowledge. We only ever had one issue with our auditors when we were in the process of going public, and it was around commissions. We were managing our commissions on a spreadsheet. We had like 300 salespeople, and we literally got to the point where we couldn't pay people on time. Like, we couldn't get the math right, because the comp plan was a little complicated. It had below-the-line components that were bonus-driven. It had above-the-line components that were commission-driven. It was a little bit tricky to calculate, and we were trying to do it all by hand. And one of our FP&A leaders teamed up with one of our revenue operations leaders and said, look, we got to fix this or we're going to fall on our face. Like, we can barely do it today. The auditors are already concerned. If we don't implement some new technology, we're never going to be successful as a public company. And they went to me, I was the chief operating officer at the time, and to the chief financial officer, and they laid out a plan to implement exactly, I think. And it was a very successful program. And they did exactly what I'm talking about. But the person who did it was also a very talented, really high potential up-and-coming leader. So that's one brief example. I can tell you more about that later if you want. Hey, this has been a lot of fun. I hope you're enjoying yourselves. Have a fabulous rest of your day.
All right, thank you, Dan. I am here to tell everyone that lunch is ready. If you want to go up to the Palm Garden room, up the escalator or the elevators, exactly where lunch was yesterday, grab a bite. We're back here at 1 p.m. We're also around the corner in the breakout room, at 1 p.m. And the demo booths are open. If you want to check something out that you've seen between yesterday and today, grab someone and ask for a demo. All right, see you back here and in the breakout room at 1.